You are about to hear something that has been labeled dangerous, not because it is false, but because it is too simple, too destabilizing, and too empowering to be allowed into public consciousness. Nearly a century ago, a German biochemist named Otto Warburg stood before the scientific world and presented a discovery so profound that it shattered the foundations of how disease was understood. He proved, with experimental rigor so strong it earned a Nobel Prize, that cancer cells behave fundamentally differently from healthy cells, not because of mysterious mutations first, but because of how they process oxygen. This was not philosophy, not speculation, but hard metabolic science. And yet what followed was not celebration, but quiet burial. You were never meant to focus on this, because once you do, power shifts. Warburg showed that when oxygen delivery and utilization inside the cell collapses, the cell does not die immediately. Instead, it regresses, switching to an ancient emergency mode of energy production, fermentation, even in the presence of oxygen. This adaptation, now called the Warburg Effect, is the metabolic fingerprint of cancer. Let that sink in. Cancer, in its earliest stages, is not chaos. It is order under threat. It is a cell suffocating and choosing survival at any cost. I want you to understand why this truth was so uncomfortable. If cancer were purely genetic, random, and inevitable, then your role is passive. You wait. You submit. You consume treatments designed to attack outcomes, not causes. But if cancer begins as a respiratory failure at the cellular level, if it emerges when oxygen signaling breaks down, then suddenly breath is no longer trivial. Oxygen is no longer background noise. It becomes the master regulator. And that is dangerous knowledge. Because breathing is not owned by an industry. It cannot be patented. It cannot be locked behind a prescription. You control it, whether you are aware of it or not. And most of your life, you have been doing it poorly. This is where the secret sharpens. Warburg himself stated, repeatedly and unequivocally, that the prime cause of cancer is the replacement of oxygen respiration with sugar fermentation. Not a contributing factor, the cause. Modern textbooks soften this language. They dilute it. They surround it with layers of genetic complexity until the original insight becomes unrecognizable. But the core has never been disproven. In fact, it has been repeatedly confirmed and quietly reframed. Tumor hypoxia, mitochondrial dysfunction, acidic microenvironments. These are not new ideas. They are Warburg's truth, wearing modern masks. You are breathing right now, but you are not oxygenating in the way your cells evolved to require. Shallow, rapid, stress-driven respiration starves tissues while giving you the illusion of air. This is not accidental. This is cultural conditioning layered on biological ignorance. And the moment you realize that breath is not about air volume, but about cellular respiration efficiency, the entire story of cancer begins to look very different. This is the point where most people turn away, because it implies responsibility. I'm telling you not to. Because once you see this, you cannot unsee it. And the rest of what I will show you depends on your willingness to accept that something as mundane as breathing may sit at the root of one of the most feared diseases on earth. Now you must feel the weight of where you are standing, because this is not an abstract theory floating above your life. This is a description of your daily physiology. Look at the modern human condition and tell me it does not resemble a slow suffocation ritual disguised as comfort. You sit for hours with your spine collapsed, your diaphragm immobilized, your chest breathing shallow and fast, as if you are perpetually fleeing a threat that never arrives. Your nervous system lives in low-grade panic, Your mouth hangs open. Your breath bypasses the nasal filters designed to regulate oxygen and carbon dioxide balance. And you call this normal. This is the metabolic trap. This is how hypoxia becomes invisible. Not dramatic, not sudden, chronic, quiet, acceptable. Cancer does not appear overnight. It incubates in environments where oxygen signaling is disrupted, long before tumor ever forms. Cells are exquisitely sensitive to their oxygen landscape. When oxygen tension drops, when carbon dioxide is expelled too aggressively through overbreathing, blood vessels constrict instead of dilate. Oxygen release from hemoglobin weakens, and tissues enter a state of silent starvation. This is not intuitive, and that is why it is so dangerous. You think breathing more equals more oxygen, but physiology obeys different laws. Overbreathing lowers carbon dioxide, and without sufficient carbon dioxide, oxygen cannot be efficiently released into cells. You are breathing plenty of air, yet your cells are gasping. This is the paradox at the heart of modern disease. Under these conditions, cells adapt. They always adapt. When mitochondrial respiration becomes unreliable, the cell activates backup systems. Glycolysis ramps up. Sugar becomes the primary fuel, not because it is efficient, but because it does not require oxygen. This is emergency metabolism. Fast, dirty, acid-producing. In the short term, it keeps the cell alive. In the long term, it destabilizes everything. DNA repair falters. Apoptosis, signaling weakens. Angiogenic factors activate. The environment becomes acidic, inflamed, and chaotic. This is not yet cancer, but it is the soil cancer requires. And here is the uncomfortable part. This soil is cultivated by lifestyle patterns so normalized you defend them without realizing it. You are told cancer is random, but randomness does not produce consistent metabolic signatures across nearly all tumors studied. Hypoxia does. You are told genetics are destiny, but genes express themselves in response to environment. And oxygen is the most ancient environmental signal your cells know. Long before hormones, before neurotransmitters, before complex immune signaling, there was oxygen. And when oxygen disappears, life does not immediately die. It regresses. It remembers older survival codes. Cancer is not a foreign invader. It is a memory activated under pressure. This is why this knowledge is unsettling. It implies that prevention is not merely screening and surveillance, but restoration of internal conditions that modern life systematically erodes. It implies that your breath, posture, stress response, and daily oxygen economy matter more than you have ever been told. Not in a motivational sense, but in a biochemical one. You are not broken. You are maladapted. An adaptation can be reversed, but only if you first accept that the danger is not out there waiting to strike you randomly. It is already here, quietly shaping your cellular environment with every unconscious breath you take. Now we descend into the mechanism, because mystery dissolves the moment you see the machinery clearly. Inside every healthy cell, there is a structure that determines whether that cell contributes to life or slowly undermines it. The mitochondrion. This is not just a power plant. It is a decision-making center. When oxygen is present and properly utilized, mitochondria generate energy through oxidative phosphorylation, a clean, efficient process that produces large amounts of ATP and very little waste. But this process is exquisitely sensitive. It depends not just on oxygen entering your lungs, but on oxygen being released from your blood, crossing membranes, and reaching the mitochondrial interior at the right chemical pressure. That pressure is governed by carbon dioxide, pH, and breathing rhythm, not willpower or fitness myths. When this system is disrupted, the cell faces a choice. die, or adapt. Healthy cells under prolonged oxygen stress often die through apoptosis, a controlled self-destruction that protects the organism. But some cells do something else. They downregulate mitochondrial respiration and upregulate glycolysis, even when oxygen is technically available. This is the Warburg Effect in its raw form. It is not about oxygen absence, but oxygen dysfunction. The cell behaves as if oxygen were unavailable because the signaling environment tells it so. Imagine a city power plant receiving fuel but losing the instructions on how to use it. Emergency generators turn on, lights flicker, systems degrade. But the city does not go dark immediately. It limps. This metabolic shift has consequences. Glycolysis produces lactic acid, lowering intracellular and extracellular pH. Acidic environments suppress immune surveillance and encourage tissue invasion. Mitochondrial signaling that normally triggers apoptosis becomes muted. Reactive oxygen species, once tightly regulated, now fluctuate unpredictably, damaging DNA while failing to activate proper repair or death pathways. Angiogenic signals are released, calling new blood vessels to feed the struggling tissue. From the cell's perspective, this is survival. From the organism's perspective, this is betrayal. And it all begins with distorted oxygen economics. Here is where breath enters the story, as a control mechanism, rather than a lifestyle accessory. Oxygen delivery to tissues is governed by the Bohr effect, a physiological law stating that hemoglobin releases oxygen more readily in the presence of higher carbon dioxide and appropriate acidity. When you chronically overbreathe, when stress keeps your respiration fast and shallow, carbon dioxide is blown off excessively. Blood becomes more alkaline. Hemoglobin holds onto oxygen instead of releasing it. This is called the oxygen paradox. You feel air hunger, so you breathe more, which worsens cellular oxygenation. Over time, tissues adapt to hypoxia as a baseline. This is the silent precondition. Ancient breathing disciplines described this long before modern terminology existed. They spoke of conserving breath, slowing it, making it deep but quiet, not to relax the mind alone, but to thicken the blood's vitality and awaken internal fire. They did not know the word mitochondria, but they understood that life force diminished when breath became frantic and shallow. Modern science now confirms the same pattern with different language. Controlled breathing alters carbon dioxide tolerance. Carbon dioxide alters oxygen release. Oxygen release determines mitochondrial behavior. Mitochondrial behavior determines whether a cell remains cooperative or turns feral. This is why cancer metabolism looks ancient. It resembles yeast fermentation, one of the oldest energy systems on Earth. Under oxygen stress, multicellular organisms revert to unicellular survival logic. That is not a metaphor. It is evolutionary memory encoded in your cells. And the trigger is not a random mutation first. It is a sustained signal that oxygen, the master regulator of complexity, can no longer be trusted. Change the signal, and you change the decision. That is the mechanism. That is the leverage point. And that is why breath, when trained correctly, is not wellness theater. It is cellular governance. Now we move from understanding to action, and this is where most people fail, because they underestimate precision. Breathing is not about taking bigger breaths. It is about restoring the chemical conditions that allow oxygen to do its job at the cellular level. What I'm about to give you is not relaxation breathing, not meditation theater, but a metabolic protocol grounded in laboratory physiology. If you perform it casually, nothing happens. If you perform it correctly, you begin to change the internal environment that determines whether cells cooperate or or defect. This is why it is rarely taught properly. It demands discipline, patience, and attention to signals your body has taught you to ignore. You begin with posture, because collapsed structure sabotages respiration before it starts. Your spine must be upright, but not rigid. Crown of the head gently elevated, ribcage stacked over the pelvis, so the diaphragm can descend without resistance. You breathe only through the nose. This is non-negotiable. Nasal breathing regulates airflow, preserves nitric oxide, and prevents the carbon dioxide washout that mouth breathing causes. Your inhale is quiet, almost restrained, drawn low into the abdomen rather than lifted into the chest. The goal is not maximum air, but minimal disturbance. Your exhale is slower than your inhale, unforced, as if you are fogging a mirror internally without letting the breath escape audibly. After several cycles, you introduce the most important element, the pause. At the end of a normal exhale, you gently hold your breath, not with tension, not with strain, but with calm attention. This pause increases carbon dioxide slightly, which is exactly what you want. You remain here until you feel the first subtle signal of air hunger, a warmth in the chest, a gentle pressure at the throat. Never panic. Then you release and inhale calmly, through the nose again. This cycle is repeated slowly, rhythmically, for several minutes. What you are training is not lung capacity, but carbon dioxide tolerance. This is the switch most people never touch. As carbon dioxide tolerance increases, blood vessels dilate, oxygen release improves, and tissues receive what they have been starved of, despite years of heavy breathing. You may feel warmth spreading through the body, tingling in the extremities, a sense of calm alertness rather than sedation. These are signs you are doing it correctly. If you feel dizzy, anxious, or gasping, you are overdoing it. This protocol is subtle by design, because cellular signaling responds to gradients, not shocks. This is where ancient ritual and modern science align. The stillness, the quiet breath, the pauses that feel almost uncomfortable are not symbolic. They are chemical instructions. You are telling your cells that oxygen can be trusted again, that emergency fermentation is no longer required. Over time, mitochondria respond. They upregulate oxidative enzymes. They restore apoptotic sensitivity. They reduce the need for glycolytic overdrive. This does not happen in one session, and anyone who promises instant miracles is lying to you. But this protocol changes the terrain, and cancer, at its core, is a disease of terrain. You must understand the gravity of this. You are not adding something to your body. You are removing a distortion that modern life imposed on your respiration. This is why it feels strangely familiar when done correctly, as if the body recognizes the pattern, because it does. This is how humans breathed long before chairs, screens, and chronic stress rewired the nervous system. Perform this daily, with respect and consistency, and you begin to rebuild an internal environment where oxygen respiration is once again dominant. That is the objective. Nothing mystical, nothing vague. Just restoring the conditions under which healthy cells thrive and rogue cells lose their advantage. Now you need a timeline, because belief without measurement collapses under doubt, and this protocol operates on predictable biological schedules. In the first days, what changes is not your cells, but your awareness. You begin to notice how often you overbreathe, how shallow your default respiration has become, how quickly stress hijacks your breath. This is not failure, this is exposure. Your nervous system is revealing its conditioning. Within 1 to 2 weeks of consistent practice, measurable shifts begin. Your resting breath rate drops. Your tolerance for the post-exhale pause increases. What once triggered discomfort now feels neutral. This is carbon dioxide tolerance rising, and with it, oxygen delivery efficiency improves. You may notice warmer hands and feet, deeper sleep, clearer morning cognition. These are not subjective fantasies. They are vascular and metabolic responses. By weeks 3 to 6, the internal environment begins to stabilize. Heart rate variability improves, a sign that the autonomic nervous system is shifting out of chronic defense. Exercise feels different. You recover faster. You require less air to perform the same tasks. This is a critical marker. It means your mitochondria are producing more energy per unit of oxygen. Efficiency is returning. At the cellular level, this is when oxidative metabolism begins to reassert dominance. Glycolytic dependency weakens. Acid load reduces. Inflammatory signaling calms. This is not visible on a scan, but it is visible in blood chemistry, in lactate handling, in subjective vitality that no stimulant can replicate. Months into disciplined practice, the terrain has changed enough to matter long-term. Cells that once relied on emergency metabolism lose their advantage. Oxygen-rich, properly signaled environments favor cooperation, specialization, and controlled death when necessary. This is the opposite of cancer logic. I am not telling you. This protocol cures cancer. Anyone who claims that is irresponsible. I am telling you something far more unsettling. Cancer struggles to thrive in environments where oxygen respiration is restored and maintained. That is prevention at the level that matters. Not fear-based surveillance, but internal order. Now comes the challenge, and I will not soften it. You can listen to this, nod, feel briefly empowered, and return to unconscious breathing. Most people do. Or you can accept that every breath you take is either reinforcing hypoxic adaptation or dismantling it. There is no neutral breathing. You are either training your cells to trust oxygen or preparing them to abandon it. This is not motivational language. This is metabolic reality. The Warburg Effect is not just a cancer phenomenon. It is a warning signal. It tells you what happens when respiration fails quietly over time. You live in a world that profits from treating outcomes while ignoring conditions. Breath is a condition. Posture is a condition. Nervous system tone is a condition. You now know how they connect to cellular fate. That knowledge carries responsibility. I cannot breathe for you. No doctor can. No machine can. This is the one lever that has always been yours, hidden in plain sight, dismissed because of its simplicity. Use it deliberately, daily, with precision, and you are no longer passive in the face of metabolic decline. You are actively shaping the environment your cells must obey. That is not wellness. That is sovereignty.